Kia ora and welcome into the Kiwi Football Fix. What we do here on this show is we shine a spotlight on all things New Zealand football, both here and abroad. Today on the show, we are lucky to be joined by somebody in studio. It's been a raft of guests in the big screen. Been looking over here a lot, but I finally get to share a studio with Tom Sermanni, Football Ferns head coach. Thanks so much for keeping me company today.
Fantastic to be here. Good to be back in New Zealand.
Yeah, and so let us know when you got back, because obviously the Trans-Tasman bubble opened up April 19. You're domiciled in Australia. When did you get the opportunity to come back to New Zealand?
Well, I actually got back on the first day that the bubble opened. So
right.
It was exciting times at Sydney Airport. You know, it was good to see. It was good to be back in an airport actually, and seeing a bit of life around an airport. And there was a lot of excited people there, because obviously a lot of families who hadn't been back to New Zealand for a long time hadn't seen their families. So I think for a lot of people it was quite an emotional day.
Yeah, was it a bit, I don't know, anxiety inducing? Because like you haven't travelled for so long, and then you're starting to think, well, where's my passport? What's the procedure here? You know, when do you go through the check-in process and all that sort of stuff? Like, was it a bit strange?
It kind of was at first, you know. It was kind of like, okay, what do I need to take out? I need to take my laptop out. I need to, you know, all that kind of stuff that you just used to do on remote, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had to get back in the swing, but. As soon as you got through and the duty-free was open, the lounge was open, and as I say, people were sort of excited. It was a cool day actually.
What did you get duty-free? Am I allowed to ask?
No, on this way, it's probably the main reason that they bring me back over, because I bring the Toblerone for the office.
Oh, so, right. Massive blocks of the stuff.
Yes, yeah. So they weren't missing me, but they were certainly missing the Toblerone. So Toblerone on the way over, gin for my wife on the way back.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, good stuff. Oh, when do you return to Australia?
I'm heading back this Saturday.
Okay, well, it's nice to have you here on the Kiwi Football Fix for the time being. While you've been in Australia, it's been a strange old time. I mean, we had you on the Kiwi Football Fix a number of weeks back now, but look, with COVID and all that sort of stuff, how have you actually coped throughout the last 12-month period? Because I would imagine it would be quite difficult to do your job as Football Ferns head coach. Yeah,
because you can't do a lot. You know, you can think about doing a lot, you can think in your head and you can put things down, you can plan things, but you really don't have any activity. It was great. We had 7 players in the WLeague, so that was fantastic, because that actually got me out around the country watching games and catching up, actually physically catching up with the players, which, you know, is fantastic. And, you know, then just sort of looking at videos and stuff, but it's still not the same as actual person-to-person contact.
Yeah, so how good was it being able to follow those in the WLeague? You know, there's a now iconic photo of yourself, Annalie Longo, Claudia Bunch, after the victory, won the WLeague. How much interaction did you have with those players face-to-face? Was it like a weekly thing? Was it fortnightly, monthly?
It varied. You know, there was times when I would see them, you know, twice in a week, and then there was times when it would be, you know, 2 or 3 weeks before seeing them again. Probably the more challenging players were the 3 that were in Perth, because Perth went through a whole range of restrictions, travel restrictions, so their schedule was all over the place. So I probably physically caught up with them 2 or 3 times, but the Melbourne, the Brisbane players, Canberra players, I caught up with fairly regularly.
And so what are you saying when you see them? Are you talking to them about what they're doing on the field for their certain WLeague team? Is it more around what the future holds for the Football Ferns, the Tokyo Olympics? Is it all of the above?
It's all of the above. You know, you're settling in. You know, the 3 girls that went to Perth, you know, that's their, like you said, first time they've dipped their toe in the water and leaving the country to play football in a professional sense. So you just kept in touch with them just to make sure everything was going okay, and they were having the time of their life, living in Perth, playing football.
Yeah.
And then the other ones, as I say, I was able to catch up with a bit more regularly, because being East Coast, it was easier to get to their games.
How good was the story of Claudia Bunch? Because it was her first professional hit out. Yeah. She's with the Victory, and she wins the title in her first crack. Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Great story, and she played every minute of every game.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, quite phenomenal, really, for a young player just to go in there and in that environment and settle in so well. So she did good. I mean, it was interesting because her first couple of games she was a little bit nervy, and then she really settled into her stride and got better. week in and week out. And to be fair, every coach was delighted with the Kiwi players that they had, both on and off the field. So it was a great exercise for the girls to be able to play there, but it was also, really good for the WLeague to have a look at New Zealand players and find out what they can actually offer, both on the field and off the field.
Well, that's a great point that you make, Tom, because obviously I think when we spoke to you on the Football Fix earlier, we were talking about the Wellington Phoenix efforts to get a women's team into the WLeague competition, and it didn't materialise. On the back of what these New Zealand ladies have done in the recently completed competition, do you think that will provide further impetus for the Wellington Phoenix to get into the competition next time around?
Well, I think the impetus is there, and I think the discussions are already happening. And the good thing at the moment is that they're happening now or earlier, as opposed to last year when they literally happened at the last minute. Yeah. So, I think obviously the Kiwi players been in the league and making that connection and seeing them. And it's like once you interact with people, the relationship is so much different. So I think it's certainly been beneficial that those players were in the league.
What's your involvement in that process? Like, do you get to have much say in what the Wellington Phoenix do or don't do and what the FFA accept into their competition?
Not so much. There's a pay grade above mine, so I kind of work at this other level. The fortunate thing is because I've been in Australia for so long, I generally know everybody that's involved in football there. Yeah. So my connection in that regard is more of in an informal basis, if you like, and finding out information and talking to people and selling people the idea about how good it would be for Phoenix to be in the league. Because, like most things, there is a little bit of pushback there in the sense that they don't know if they want to bring in a New Zealand team ahead of another Australian team, etc. So, I think part of my role has been to try and sell that to the decision makers over there. And then the real negotiations happen at that level above me.
Okay, well, let's hope that at some point in the very near future it does get the tick and we see a Wellington Phoenix team in that WLeague competition. Just going back to your role with those New Zealand players throughout the WLeague and trying to get across them, talk to them as much as possible. That's one side of your job as Football Ferns head coach, but you've also got to talk to players abroad, and you've got women everywhere, don't you? Europe, America, and obviously here in New Zealand as well. So throughout the COVID year, how difficult was that, given all the different time zones and all the people that you needed to accommodate?
It's been challenging. The biggest challenge was when and if you wanted to try and get everybody together at some stage, because literally we've got players playing in virtually every time zone throughout the world. So if you were trying to have a Zoom with all the group, it became almost impossible because it was midnight for some players, it was 6 o'clock in the morning for others, it was during training time for others. So that was challenging. What you tend to find is an international coach is that when players are in the professional environment and when they're playing and when everything is going okay, they're okay. You don't hear too much. Things are just taking over. So the important thing is just to be there when things are going wrong, or they need some advice, or they need some help with anything. Perhaps moving clubs, or things are not working out well at the clubs. That's when the importance of the relationship becomes apparent.
So you're in New Zealand and you're off very shortly, but in this little window that you've got, what are you hoping to achieve with the New Zealand-based players that are here?
Well, not a lot with the New Zealand-based players because they're already either in programmes or doing things. What basically here, there was a couple of things. We had an under-20s camp. We had an under-17s camp. So they've been really valuable because that's the first time I've had a chance to look at those players, and the first time those players have been able to come into the camp for some time. So that was really valuable because you start looking to see players that you think might be on the radar and players that you might be able to give an opportunity to in the near future. But sort of generically, again, it was just sort of catching up with players, WLeague players coming back and going into programmes, and to make sure the ones that are here are still getting catered for suitably.
We're about 11 weeks away from the Tokyo Olympics, so it's rapidly approaching. how set in stone is your Football Ferns squad for that event? Is there a little bit of leeway for people to force their way into it? I mean, is it 90% of the way there?
I think it's like most squads. You've probably got 75% already ticked off. It's always the last, 3, 4, 5 spots. And to be honest, that has been the real challenge because I haven't seen the players since the middle of March last year.
Wow.
I haven't been over in New Zealand since February last year. So your established players who are playing regularly in America or Europe, they're kind of taking care of themselves. But it's that other group who have either been based here or the younger players that over the last 12 or 14 months you'd have opportunities to see and to work with and see how they develop. Basically haven't been able to see any of those players play. And so that's been a real difficulty. What we are trying to do is bring as many players back from Europe and our domestic players and get them together in early June and be in a camp for a couple of weeks in early June. And that will be a time when there'll be a real opportunity for some players to, cement a place in the squad or actually get a place in the squad.
Have you had anybody tell you through your WhatsApp groups and your Zoom calls that they're actually a little reticent to go to Japan because of the COVID situation? Has anyone pulled out?
No, nobody, touch wood, at this stage has pulled out.
I don't know if that's wood,
That's
Tom.
wood, no, that's touch wood.
Some sort of, I don't
Just
know what
touch
it
your
is.
head, that will do it. That's the next best thing. No, nobody has. Nobody's given any indication of that. And I'd be surprised, the majority, particularly our players overseas, they're living in amongst COVID, so it's really not much different to them. And I think our players based here and in Australia are really keen to go there.
Is there anyone that's like not on our radar in the media and in broadcasting scenes that you've seen recently and you've gone, this is one for the future, we need to keep a close eye on her?
There's a couple of players that have caught my eye at the 20s camp and the 17s camp, and it'll be interesting to see how they go. And we might give a couple of them an opportunity at this camp that we're having in June, just to see how they go with the more mature players and see how they go in that environment.
Okay. In this year, 2021, the government has purchased a whole bunch of vaccinations for the population, and we're seeing on social media pages a variety of New Zealand athletes receiving the jab so they can safely go to Japan. What's the situation with New Zealand football, the All Whites, the Football Ferns? Have you received jabs? Are you receiving jabs in the near future? What's the go?
I think receiving them in the near future. Some of the staff have already received their injection, and then I think anybody that's going to the Olympics will be getting that injection. I come back in a couple of weeks, so I'll get mine then, and then you need to wait for 3 weeks before you get the second one. So yeah, that's all in hand. I think the challenging bit is the players coming from overseas, where we don't actually have any control over to a degree what happens to them. But fortunately, I think in most of those countries, the injection's getting rolled out quite quickly. At
the Olympics, it's almost like it's the Tom Sermanni group of death, because you've got your old teams everywhere. Yeah. Obviously, with the Football Ferns, you've got the United States, the Australians, Sweden. Yeah. Would you have it any other way?
Perhaps. It's a pretty tough draw. The reality is, every draw, when you're in the fourth pool, the fourth pot, every draw is a tough draw. And the thing for us, the New Zealand team, is that, whoever we play against, we've really got to turn up in the day. We've got to get our tactics right, we've got to get our preparation right, and we've got to get our performance right. And I think if we do that, we've shown that we can be competitive against anyone in the world. And so we just go in there and play like Kiwis.
I mean, we always ask our athletes and teams, what are the expectations that you place upon yourself before a tournament or a competition? Kind of hard to get a handle on what you're going to do on the field when you can't get everybody together, but what are the expectations that you have placed upon yourself?
My expectations are all around performance, because you can't, even at the best of times in our sport, it's very difficult to predict results, because even if you're the poorest team on the day, you can still actually win a game, or if you're the best team on the day, you can still actually lose a game.
Yeah.
I think the key thing for me is that I want us to go out and play like a Kiwi team, and that is to, not be on the back foot, to make sure we give it a go, to make sure we play the very best that we can. That's the key thing, and then if we can do all that well enough, then there's a chance that we're going to be able to get results.
See, that's why we like you here in New Zealand, Tom, because you actually embrace the culture and the spirit of the way we do things, whereas maybe the last coach didn't quite comprehend that.
Yeah.
And so, and in saying that, I suppose, did you, when you came in after Andreas Haraf had exited, what kind of work did you have to do in order to make the Ferns believe that the New Zealand way was the way?
Well, I think the players always felt that, and I think that was one of the reasons that it was problematic prior to me coming in. I was fortunate that we had a guy called Aaron Walsh, did a lot of work, and Christy Hill at the PFA did a lot of work around the team and the culture of the team and what the team stood for. And the players, that really sort of was the foundation. So when I came in, all that foundation work was already done. So that made my job a little bit easier. And I think the other thing that made my job a little bit easier was, I've had the Australian team and I've had the Canadian team, and I knew the New Zealand team quite well, their players well. So those cultures for me are all very similar. They all come from countries that want to have a go and want to try and find ways to win things. So, as I say, when I came in, fortunately that foundation was there, and it made my job a lot easier.
You've got a contract with New Zealand football and the Ferns through until just after the Olympics.
Yeah.
What happens beyond the Olympics for you? What is your desire? Do you want to stay and go through to the World Cup in 2023, played here and in Australia? Is that your goal?
I don't really have any goals after my contract at this stage. I think that's something that New Zealand football actually has. They have to decide what they want to do and what they want to look for. So at the moment, my focus is completely on going through to the Olympics, and whatever happens after that sort of happens after that. So I haven't even, I haven't thought that far ahead, and I haven't, thought into sort of what happens next. I mean, initially I only came into this job for a 9-month period. Now it's over 2.5 years, so it's
overstayer.
An overstayer, yeah. It's almost like Kiwi's going to Bondi. Sorry, that's it.
Well, the Gold Coast.
Is that yeah. Anyway, so my main focus is just seeing this through to the Olympics, and then whatever happens next happens.
Do you want to stay?
Look, I'm enjoying the job. I enjoy working with the players. But it's not about me. The organisation has to think about what it wants to do moving forward and what direction they want to go in. And that's at some stage probably a conversation that we might have. But as I say, it's really I've never looked further ahead than the job that I'm doing to when the end of that job is, and then whatever happens after that happens.
But you've got the support of the players, and that was evident in Abby Erceg rejoining the Ferns. I mean, she was brave enough to take a stand under Haraf, and then when you came along, you had that pre-existing relationship, and she was confident in your ability and your understanding of the Kiwi culture to come back. So that is something that weighs heavily in your favour, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, it does. I don't know if the players still feel like that 2.5 years in.
Oh, do they not?
I don't know. No, the players have been great. They're great. The organisation's fantastic. I enjoy working in the environment. But as I say, whatever happens next, that decision has to be thought through. I think what's happened with me coming in, although it's had much longer term than that was anticipated initially, is it's still been sort of short term stuff. World Cup to Olympics, the Olympics cancelled to Olympics, and then I think everybody has to take a breath and say, okay, what it's not now just you know, a quick fix. It has to be thought out of what the organisation wants to do going forward.
All right, well, let's look short term and in between now and the Tokyo Olympics. What do you want to achieve with this group in terms of games? Because I would assume that it would be quite difficult to organise fixtures with players abroad and not arriving with the squad until the Tokyo Games. And I would also assume that it might be quite difficult to play Australia, given that you play them in the group phase of the tournament. You probably don't want to give too much away. So what are your options?
We don't really have any options. Pre-Tokyo, we don't have options at all, because we can't go anywhere and play, and we can't bring anyone here to play. So the best we can do is, as I say, in next sort of over the next, in about two or 3 weeks' time, get as many players together here as possible, get the best preparation we can here, and then meet up with the ones that go direct to Tokyo. Yeah. The advantage that we've got is that we've got a core of players that have played together for a very long time, and we've got a core of players that got on very well on the field, but also got on very well off the field. So that's the big advantage. So we're not kind of coming together as a sort of group of strangers or a whole different squad or players that are getting to know each other. So that's an advantage for us. We're in the process of arranging a couple of games while we're in Tokyo before we go into the tournament. Again, you've got to be careful, because you can't play too many games because you only get a short period of time. Yeah. The last thing you want to do is play a lot of games in that lead-up period, and then suddenly, you know, your team's exhausted going into the tournament. So it's just getting all that balance right.
While you're here in New Zealand, is there maybe an opportunity? I was thinking sort of outside the box. Last year, Netball New Zealand, they had a quad series where the Silver Ferns actually met the New Zealand men's national side. Would you think of like some sort of intergender match, a New Zealand men's selection up against your football Ferns?
Well, it's not so much that. What we do is as soon as we come into camp in June, part of that camp will be playing against boys teams. So we tend to get boys teams around sort of ages 14 to 16. That's kind of you either play that kind of age group, or you kind of go to the over 35s age group where the guys have slowed down a little bit.
That can be dangerous though, because I played over 30s a few years back, and everyone gets angry. They're really angry because they think that they're still as good as they were in their 20s, and they just start hacking everyone down.
That can be that you've got to get the right players. You've got to get players that realise that they're not 22 anymore, and that can be a challenge. Even if you go over 50s, that can be a challenge.
All of a sudden, Abby Urseg's ruled out of the tournament. This over 30s mob just hacked the pieces out of it. Yeah, jeez. Okay, so it's shaping up all right. Like, how comfortable are you in terms of between now and then? How comfortable are you that you'll have a decent lead-in for the Ferns to hit the ground running in Tokyo?
Yeah, I'm pretty confident. I come from an era where you just cope with what you have to cope with, and you do with what you have to do. And as I say, we'll have time with the team in Tokyo. The players know each other. They kind of know what we're doing playing-wise, although that needs obviously refreshing once they go away, because they tend to forget that and it goes elsewhere. But I think the circumstances we have are a little bit challenging, but we've got a group of players that are able to cope in that kind of environment. We've got a group of players that are, it's one of the great things about having a team like a New Zealand team is that they get on with stuff. There's no big timers. There's no people that moan and complain about stuff. They come in, the players get on with things, and we'll just do that. And we'll have enough time together to get the stuff that we need to get in place. And hopefully, the biggest thing when you go into tournaments is having everybody fit and healthy. So if we're able to do that, we're able to have the time together that we hope we're going to have, then we'll be okay. Then, then it's easy under these circumstances to roll out excuses, after excuse after excuse. But that's kind of futile. You do what you need to do. we'll get together, we'll be prepared and we'll be ready to go in the first game. And if we can get all those things right, then we'll be competitive.
Well, look, it'll be great to see you and your football Ferns over in Tokyo doing great things against the US, Australia, Sweden. Tom Sermanni, thanks so much for coming back to New Zealand once the bubble opened and joining us on the Kiwi Football Fix. We wish you all the best at the Tokyo Olympics, mate. I hope you really do well.
Thanks very much. Great to be back.